Hello and welcome to the Sound Up Seattle podcast, your one-stop shop for all things Seattle and Washington sports. I'm your host, Tyler Cartwright, joined as always by my co-host,
John Carey.
And we're here today with what will be basically the next 2 weeks of podcasts. We're going to do a little bit of prep work this week and do next week's pod right after this one. So you're not going to get a full pod next week. We're going to kind of stagger things. But this week, what we've got for you in this episode is a big reaction to that Packers loss this last weekend. We're going to talk Vikings, Seahawks, and then we're going to get into value dogs and talk a little Mariners. We haven't really dove into the Mariners besides a little bit last week, so we figured it was time. Anything to say, John, before we get started?
Man, I'm so excited to talk about the Mariners. I don't watch a ton of MLB anymore the way I used to, but I think I might like talking MLB more than any other sport. So I'm excited to get into this Mariners stuff. Also, just wanted to note for those watching, got my Oregon State Beavers sweater on. A couple Beav alumni. Go Beavs! But no, let's get into it.
I'm wearing my sister's car race shirt right now, but it's
nice.
From Sisters Oregon.
Nice. So eclectic. We're
repping Oregon right now.
We're so much more than just the state of Washington.
And I guess we can just throw in a little coyote picnic here for you.
Been a while since I left this town.
All right, John. Let's break it down. It's been what? 3-4 days since that game, and I'm still reeling. I'm still just upset at the Seahawks loss to the Packers 30-13 in what was a smackdown. Give me your instant gut reactions, and then we'll talk kind of all things under the sun about this one.
My gut reaction is that might be the division. It's not fair, but it's a bit of reality. This game was very disappointing. Obviously, Green Bay is an awesome team. This was by no means a walk-in and get the dub type of game, but it was an important one. And yeah, it was just a smackdown. Seahawks scored 7 in the fourth quarter, but don't be confused. They were down 20-3. This game was well out of hand early. Down 14-0 in the first quarter. Not the showing that we needed from this Mike Macdonald defense or from this Geno Smith. I guess only partially Geno Smith offense, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, I think the first thing that popped into my head when I was just watching this game, had it on the TV, I was like, man, this Seahawks defense cannot stop Josh Jacobs. Those first 2 drives for Josh Jacobs just kind of put us in the dirt right there. It was 14 straight points for Green Bay in, I think, 6 minutes. It was something crazy. And the Seahawks fall behind 14, and especially against a Packers team and any team that is as good as the Packers, it's you're not going to be able to catch up to them just by outscoring them. They're such a well-rounded team that it was going to be so tough for these Seahawks to come back. And yeah, obviously injuries to Geno Smith and just kind of key players struggling a little bit in this game really slowed things down. Obviously not having Kenneth Walker really tough for us. Charbonnet was not as explosive as we would have liked. Just an all-around tough showing, and definitely making me rethink the division. We can talk about that a little bit more later. Let's keep breaking down this game. What were your thoughts? Sam Howell obviously comes in for the Geno Smith injury, and the announcers did a pretty good job of noting that the Geno Smith injury was not on an illegal play. It wasn't, a flag wasn't missed because he was in the air. The announcers did a good job of that. But let's talk Sam Howell coming in. How are your thoughts? Because at the beginning of the season, you were like, let's put Sam Howell in there. I need to hear you discuss it.
Okay. Well, first of all, a lot of rocks being thrown at my boy right now. He had a tough one in his replacement stint for Geno. 5 for 14 for 24 yards, averaging 4 yards per completion. That is not what you're looking for. 0 touchdowns, 1 picks. Putting up a whopping 14.6 QBR. That's bad. That's really, really bad. So, elephant in the room, Sam Howell maybe is not the truth. Maybe. It's worth noting, obviously, there may be no harder situation in, professional football than being a backup quarterback thrust unexpectedly into the starting role of a big game. He did not have a day to prepare or a week to prepare. He was just thrown in there on the Geno injury. But ultimately you can only only judge by what your eyes are showing you, and he did not look electric. What happened to the guy, hitting deep balls down the field? How's this guy averaging 5 yards per play? The interception I understand. The 24 total yards accounted for, I do not.
I think Sam Howell, just as a guy, is like, he's so feast or famine, and he did not feast at any point when he was in this one.
Looked like Ireland in the 1800s out here, man. It was rough one for our boy Sam.
The potatoes were gone for our boy Sam.
Yeah, but honestly, and this was tough. It was brutal. They did not play well on either side of the ball, and they got smacked. For me, this was almost more of a, if you're looking at it objectively from a third-person view, it's almost more of a coming-out party for the Packers, a team that started the season well and then kind of came off a little bit. And then recently, as they've kind of rediscovered their identity behind Josh Jacobs, have just been absolutely rolling, playing their best football of the season these past 6 weeks. And yeah, today was a game where offensively, particularly, they came all the way together. Jacobs was obviously dominant, but only averaged 3.6 yards per carry. They would not have been rolling the way that they were if Jordan Love didn't play an excellent game. He was 20 of 27, 74% completion percentage for 230, 2 touchdowns, no picks, 133 QBR. That is a 10-to-1 QBR ratio to our boy Sammy. And I was amazed at his ability to spread the ball around. He hit, 2, 4, 6 different receivers with at least 2 receptions, and no receiver had more than 5. So this was a quintessential spread it out to your weapons game. And he was really, really effective. Between that and Jacobs just refusing to get less than 2.5 yards on any given carry, I am honestly more frustrated with the way the offense played than the defense, because this Green Bay offense just kind of looks like the truth.
Yeah, it's kind of what we talked about last week. It was like the Green Bay offense can be pretty potent. Like, I think we kind of threw it in there lightly of like, oh, we could maybe keep up with this Packers offense. They're not super great, but they are really good, and their ability to spread the ball was tough on our defense. Obviously, they had 5 guys with at least 34 receiving yards, and then obviously Romeo Doubs with 2 touchdowns. Just like a really solid game all around. And yeah, you're right. Jacobs only like limited yardage throughout the game, but early on he was where he really piled up most of his yards, and then the Seahawks defense was able to kind of stymie that rushing attack by the Packers. It was just too late. And the Seahawks were down, like you said, 20-3 at half. And it was, coming back, Geno with the injury in the third, it was like, okay, this one is over. We can reset, regroup, whatever we need to do. But there was no way we were coming back in that one, even though I did have some hope after we scored that touchdown and we're only down 23-13.
Yeah. I think ultimately, this Packers team, just a little bit slept on in general. When you look at their schedule, they played a tough schedule. Obviously opened the season with that tough loss to the Eagles, that back-and-forth game in Brazil where Jordan Love ended up going down. But that was a really good football game they lost. Then they lost 31-29 to the Vikings. Their worst loss of the season is a 24-14 loss to the Lions, who were amazing. And then obviously the epic Thursday Night Football 34-31 loss to the Lions. So they have 4 losses this entire season. And all 4 are to the 3 other best teams in the NFC. Like they've only lost to the very best teams in the NFC. All of them, except for the 10-point loss to the Packers, have been within a field goal. I just think maybe they've been slept on a little bit as being, in that upper tier with those other teams. And so it really makes this game a little two-sided, because on one side, this is not a loss to freak out about. They did not play very well on either side of the ball. Geno Smith got hurt. It is what it is. The problem is the division. And you want to talk division a little bit?
I think we can go to the division, but I also want to talk as we're having this discussion on the division, like the Seahawks and probably the NFC West in general is just no team is good enough to win the Super Bowl. Like one of these teams is going to make the playoffs just out of sheer luck, but none of these teams are good enough to really make a run in the playoffs. And if you were expecting that from this Seahawks team, you were mistaken. At the beginning of the season, we could have told you that. We were just hoping to make a playoff run. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now.
And that's a pessimistic take, but I get it. Especially, it's not that none of these teams are good enough to make a playoff run. This just isn't the year to do it. There are 4 dominant teams in the NFC this year. And that's nobody's fault. That's not the Seahawks' fault, but there are 4 teams that could have won the Super Bowl any of the last 5 years. And they all just happen to kind of be around at the same time in the same division. So it's a bad time to be a 67% win percentage team. Those teams win Super Bowls all the time, but this is not the year to do it. I agree with you, but we still want to make those playoffs, all things considered. We want to get that division banner. So let's talk about what just got a lot less likely. Look back just a couple weeks ago, and it was the Cardinals kind of in the crosshairs for our big threat for the division. That has really flipped. The Rams have pulled out some improbable games. We were a full game ahead going into Sunday Night Football, and now we are actually in second place in the division in lieu of the tiebreaker, which the Rams have right now. So they won, we lost. They are currently ahead of us in the standings. We will obviously need to beat them on January 5th, last game of the season, to have a shot at getting in. But beyond that, currently we're tied. Right now, our next 2 games are against the Vikings and the Bears. The Vikings, who are ahead of the Packers in the standings in the NFC North, and the Bears, who are probably an easy win. But the problem with the Bears is it's either an easy win or they play up to the level of the very best teams in the NFL, and there's no in between with them.
Yep.
So it should be an easy win, but I'm not comfortable saying that. Now, the problem with that is the Rams have the Jets and then the Cardinals. Jets, who are completely imploding, and the Cardinals, who by week 17 may be okay, draft pick position time. What's the point in rolling the ball out here? So if they go 2-0 and we go, 1-2, not only would we need to win that game, but I don't even know do you know what the secondary tiebreaker in the NFL is? If you've split the division series, is it division record?
Yeah, so if we would each go 2-1, so if we were to beat the Bears and then beat the Rams, so they would be 2-1 and we would be 2-1, I'm pretty sure it is in division record.
Yeah.
And I would have to look. I don't know off the top of my head if the Seahawks are leading that or not. But either way, I think looking at this coming in, you got the Jets playing the Rams, and that should be a free win. But the Jets aren't doing awful right now. They've been decent enough. But yeah, this Seahawks team is going to really have to compete against the Vikings. If they're able to beat this Vikings team, I think there's a chance that we end up sweeping the rest of them, going 11-6. But if we lose to this Rams team again in week 18, no matter what, that game is what matters the most. If we lose to them, no matter what, we will not make the playoffs, because we're not allowed to be a 9-8 team and make the playoffs. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, just a very, very tough stretch for the Seahawks and a tough end to the season in terms of scheduling for them. But we did talk, I think it was a month and a half ago, and we were both man, the Rams were plus 375 to make the playoffs, win the division. We were talking about that, and we were both we would, of all the teams that were remaining when they were all within a game of each other, we thought that the Rams were going to be the team that could turn it around and kind of take that leap. And they really, it took them a few weeks to do that, but they finally did it, and I can't say I'm surprised to see them here.
No, and even last week we're okay, now we're sleeping on the Rams, and that's always a bad idea. Don't sleep on McVay. I just looked it up just for the viewers' sake. Very interesting. Obviously, first tiebreaker is head-to-head. If we beat the Rams in that final game of the season, we would be tied 1-1. We are currently 3-2 in division. They are 2-2 in division. If they beat the Cardinals and then lose to us, we will both be 3-3 in division. Yeah, this gets very complicated. So Hawks can do themselves a favor by beating the Vikings next week and then taking care of the Bears. Rams could do us a favor by dropping either one of those 2 games and making life easier for us. But this could be a photo finish. I'm not even sure. It might be points 4 could be the third level tiebreaker.
I'm not sure if it goes to interdivision, if it goes to that level, or if it just goes to points. Yeah, points for, or point differential. I'm not sure where it goes to.
It also might be conference record, record against the, NFC. So
yeah,
hopefully we don't get to that point, but could be a photo finish. Maybe it won't matter, but frustrating to say the least. And it makes you look back at, the loss to the Rams in overtime, makes you look back at, the loss to the Giants in week 5 and just we should have been expecting this loss to the Packers. The loss to the Packers shouldn't be the dagger in the heart of this season because the Packers are really good. But, yeah, that might be it.
Just so you know, I just pulled it up real quick. So the way it goes is head-to-head matchup, obviously, if whichever team wins that one, but more of those. And then it goes to best win-loss percentage in games played within the division. And then it goes to best win-loss percentage in common games, so games that we shared, which would, I think, be the NFC North. And who else did we play? I'm trying to remember.
Obviously NFC West, but that's already built in, so we'd already be tied. Then it's the NFC North, and then I think both teams played like the Patriots. Did both teams play the Dolphins? Did we also get the AFC East?
Might be the AFC East. That might be right, because I know they both played the Bills. That sounds right.
That's very, very interesting. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but if whether or not we lost to the Patriots determines whether we make the playoffs, it could be a frustrating outcome.
Yes.
At what point do we just have Geno Smith and Matt Stafford box for it, you know?
We just have him go longest throw, and both of them are just like, fuck this.
Get Sam Howell out for that, baby. Let's go. Kid's got a cannon.
Let's take this opportunity to jump into this Vikings game real quick. Looking ahead to Sunday, December 22nd. Currently, Vikings are favored by 3. The line has actually gone in the Seahawks' favor here. What are your thoughts? It's Sam Darnold, who we've never been super scared of, but he's really turned it around this year. Obviously, Justin Jefferson has been a threat, but everybody's just double teamed him the entire season. Aaron Jones, a nice running back, but definitely not the stellar running back that we saw in Josh Jacobs. So, how are we feeling looking at this Vikings game?
Opportunistic is the word I'm going to say. This is a bad time to be playing this Vikings team. They have won 7 straight games since their Thursday Night Football loss to the Rams, ironically enough. They're playing really good football right now. Sam Darnold is playing probably his second best football of the season. We can't say the best when he was throwing for 350 and 4 touchdowns every game to start the year, but he's looked excellent. And Justin Jefferson, I think, is the main thing. He has really come on lately. Had a slow start to the season, particularly in the red zone, but is just becoming a bigger and bigger threat. No surprise. He's probably the best receiver in football. So I see it as an opportunity because Sam Darnold is Sam Darnold. I am not a believer that he is Christ come again. I think he's got flaws as a player. I think he will throw interceptions. And we don't have to focus on the run the way we did against Josh Jacobs. So I'm hoping our secondary can get back to doing what they do best, which is forcing quarterback mistakes. The concern is that the Vikings defense is probably better than the Packers, and they just made us look pretty bad. And that Justin Jefferson is possibly Christ come again. In which case, I'm not sure how much Witherspoon and Julian Love can do to slow him down.
Yeah, the Seahawks, we've said this all the time. It's like if there's one receiver, the Seahawks have the capability to take them away. When you look at, the games like the Rams game when Puka went out, it's like the Seahawks were able to take Cooper Kupp away and limit the damage. When you have a multitude of threats at the receiver position, like when you're looking at a game against the Packers, it's just like the Seahawks get kind of thinned out by numbers. But I think the Seahawks can, two-man Justin Jefferson with Julian Love and Witherspoon or Tariq Woolen or whatever it is. There's some combination of players that can take him out of the game. It's a question of, okay, can we do what we did to Jacobs in the second half of that Packers game and really limit the rushing yards for Aaron Jones? Can we stop Addison and his one-on-ones, whether that's against Woolen or Witherspoon? All those kinds of things are going to be really important for the Seahawks defense. My other concern about this game is that the Vikings are 12-2, the Lions are 12-2. These teams, I think, are destined to play. I think, do they play in the last week of the season? I don't remember, but I think they have one game against each other left. But they're vying for that number 1 spot in the NFC right now. And so the Vikings really are going to want this game and every game after that. Every NFC game is so important.
It's crazy considering how the records of some of these teams, but the NFC is open for all 3 of the NFC North teams. That is insane that, we're talking week 16. The winner of the NFC division could be any one of the Vikings, Packers, or Lions. Now, part of that is they just do not lose to teams that aren't each other. And another part of it is, to your point, Packers-Vikings play week 17. Vikings-Lions play week 18. So there is a lot of stuff to still be worked out in terms of this division and the larger NFC in general. It's crazy that the Lions could very realistically finish third in this division, which is just insane. Yeah, this game is huge for the Vikings. There's going to be zero phone it in. By the way, that's also part of the reason, the Packers came to play. Like, they had everything to play for. They're playing for the number 1 overall seed in the NFC as well. So, a tough time. It would have been nice to play these teams in, mid-October when they didn't realize they were necessarily contending for the number 1 overall seed. But, yeah, they should be playing their hardest football right now. One note from my end, I think you hit the nail on the head with, the way the secondary is built, our ability to hamper, one receiver teams, Addison has been playing really good.
He's been really good.
He has been absolutely peaking these last 4 weeks. Obviously, his 3 touchdown game against the Falcons was his best, but he has been really good as of late, and that is my biggest concern. It's like Justin Jefferson's obviously a freak, but if it was just him out there, it's like, okay, put Witherspoon on him and then send Julian his way. But Addison has proved himself fully capable of eating these, less talented secondary cornerbacks. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, something else that I wanted to touch on with this Seahawks discussion, and I think we'll finish up here pretty quick, but we had a comment, actually, on one of our YouTube videos about the Seahawks and how they were so ill-prepared to play the Packers this last week. And it was talking about ownership and their spending and all that kind of stuff, but really, when you come down to it, the Seahawks spend a decent amount of money. It's not... obviously, at the end of the day, you can spend more money. You can ask the owners for more money. But what the Seahawks need to do is take the money and allocate it to that offensive line and defensive line. Their lines are just not good enough right now. And we saw it really badly in the Packers. Like, that offensive line performance was so bad. That's why Sam Howell couldn't do anything. He was 5 of 14 because he was under duress the entire time. That's why Geno got injured. All these problems that we've had throughout this season have been a majority caused by the offensive line lack of production. And so I just wanted to shout out, first of all, that comment. I don't remember who did it, but it's a good comment. And, blaming ownership is partially the issue, but also just blaming the,
GM
players. GM, whoever
players,
you want. Players in terms of their performance, but you can blame the GM as well for building that line.
I love that. Blame the players. I think how many times do we have to bring up the line play,
Yeah.
And it's the same thing in college football. Ironically, it's probably the biggest comparison between college football and the pros is, you can get to a certain level. It's kind of like, Wazoo football, you can get to a certain level with flashy offensive weapons and, talented, fast cornerbacks. But ultimately, when the big boys play, when you're playing, top 10 talent, games are won and lost in the trenches. And if you don't have at least the ability to stand your ground in those matchups, you're toast. You're toast. And all the best. That's, the Vikings people don't talk about. They all just want to talk about, Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, Sam Darnold's resurgence. They don't talk about the fact that they have arguably the best defensive line in football. Like, by the way, that's going to be a problem. We didn't mention that either.
We didn't even talk about it, but
these, it's so many of these games are ultimately won and lost in the trenches, and both of our trenches. Byron Murphy's awesome, but neither our offensive or defensive line is top 10 in the NFL.
Yeah, and another shout out to Leonard Williams. Had a really good last month or so. He's been another guy. This. You think about the best teams in the league. You think the Eagles, or NFC. We'll just go NFC right now. You think Eagles, you think Lions, you think Packers, you think Vikings. Those are the top 4 probably.
Yeah.
And of those 4, the Lions' offensive line, obviously their defensive line is a little hampered by injuries, but the Lions, both sides of the ball at the line, the Vikings, obviously the defensive side of the ball, and even their offensive side is totally serviceable.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Eagles, and they've had a really great line. Obviously, the tush push is such a huge thing for the Eagles. It's the best teams have amazing lines and, decent quarterbacks. You've got Jared Goff, you've got Jalen Hurts, and you've got Sam Darnold leading the NFC right now. Really think about that. Jalen Hurts is not a great quarterback, and they're leading the NFC because they have such stellar line play, and they're not allocating 100% of their money towards quarterbacks and receivers.
Jordan Love, all these guys. None of these NFC quarterbacks are world beater quarterbacks. None of them are. All the best quarterbacks are in the AFC, competing behind mediocre lines, ironically enough. That's also part of the reason it's like, oh, the Chiefs. Well, the problem is the Chiefs have, a top 3 quarterback and great offensive and defensive lines. That's what makes them so. Their skill positions are trash, but how much does that matter when the 3, I guess, coaching, quarterback, offensive line, defensive line, check. That is such a dangerous combo. It's really real, man. It's really, really real. And you can only draft first-round wide receivers so many times. As a Colts fan, let me tell you, living through the Andrew Luck era is every year, let's try to find him another receiver in the draft. And then pretty soon your guy's retiring because he's sick and tired of getting sacked 40 times a season. It matters a lot. So that comment, agreed.
Yeah. All right. We've been talking about this for 25 minutes. Let's keep it pushing. We always do this, man. Let's get into some value dogs, and maybe we'll talk some more Seahawks in that discussion. But for now, let's hop into that. Week 16 NFL value dogs. John, last week I think was our worst week of value dogs we ever had. We both went 0-3 to bring us to me 16-29. John, you got 3 games further from your 500 goal, and you are 20-25. But because of that, we've got 3 weeks left, and I can still tie it. You didn't pull away. So
that's so brutal. I can't believe we both got offered.
I know, it's tough. Granted, only 5 of the 16 games that were played had the underdogs cover. So not great odds, but we still should have gotten at least 1 or 2. Puts underdogs at 47.5% covering on the season, so still below average, which is not what we're expecting, obviously, from this segment. But with that, John, do you want first pick, or do you want me to take first pick? I think I had it last week. You have first pick this week.
Okay, all right. Twist my arm. Okay, this week, value dogs pick number 1. Pardon me. I think it's time. This line just seems a little weird to me. I'm taking the San Francisco 49ers +1 against the Miami Dolphins. I, to be honest, don't really understand this one. I do understand that the Niners are kind of cratering. I guess maybe that's the explanation right there.
Yeah.
But this Dolphins team is not good. This Dolphins team just got kind of embarrassed this last week. Tua is a bad quarterback. He's a mediocre quarterback. How about that? Very mid. Their defense sucks. The Niners are beat to absolute hell, but they still have talent at positions out there. Purdy still should be suiting up for this game. They should still have, Debo and Kittle out there if nobody else. I just trust the infrastructure more. I think I trust Shanahan head and shoulders above Mike McDaniels. So this one doesn't make sense. I'm taking the Niners.
That's fair. I think it's a game that concerns me, but obviously, like the 49ers and Dolphins, either of these teams can win this game. It's obviously the line's at 1, so it's like either of these teams can win this game. You're just taking the team with points and the team with, I think, a longer track record, So yeah. I support that. It's not on my list, but that's okay with me. With my first pick in the Week 16 Sound Up Seattle Value Dogs, I'm going to take the Broncos +2.5 against the Chargers. The Chargers proved to me last week that Justin Herbert being injured or at least hobbled is a huge flaw for them. They gave up 40 points, I believe, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Broncos aren't going to put up 40. They're not Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans, but they are going to put up 25, and I think this Chargers team is just not potent enough right now with the way that Justin Herbert is playing injured to compete with this Broncos team. And I think the Chargers are 8-6. They're actually setting themselves up so that the Bengals can still make the playoffs. That's what the NFL really wants to happen. They want Joe Burrow in the playoffs. So I'm going with the storyline here. Chargers are going to miss the playoffs after being 8-5. Broncos will win this one.
I like it. I like it a lot. 2 good teams taking the team with the points. Two good teams with question marks, and you're taking the team with the points. Well, worth noting, just for our ongoing Bo Nix discussion, Bo Nix sucked last week, which is very validating for me personally. But that does not affect the greater conversation about these 2 teams. I think that's completely fair. With my second pick of the draft, I am taking the Jacksonville Jaguars +1 against the Raiders. Ding, 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 ding. That's the bell I ring when I pick a team for the first time in a given season. It is week 16, and this is the first time I'm shouting out Jacksonville. The reasons for me is very simple. The Raiders are tied for the longest losing streak in the NFL with the New York Giants. Neither one of them have won a game since October, I think it is. They're both lost at least like 7 or 8 straight. And Jacksonville's peaking under Mac Jones is what I'll say. Obviously,
I was going to say,
yeah,
peaking is a strong one.
Yeah, it under the Mac Jones experiments with Trevor Lawrence out for the season. This is the best they've looked. He's finally figured out, as a dynasty owner of Brian Thomas Jr., I really appreciate that he's finally figuring out that BTJ is one of the best weapons in the NFL. Really fed him the ball last week, obviously had a monster game. And is just playing with a little more confidence. I mean, he's Mac Jones. We'll be excited when he's back on the bench. But while he's in, he's finally starting to use some of these pretty talented Jacksonville weapons. Travis Etienne is playing the best he's played since early in the season. I thought he was dead. I sent roses to his family. They must think that's kind of weird now. I thought he was gone. But it's good to see that he's back. I just think this Jacksonville team has more offensive talent, more defensive talent. I think they want it more. The Raiders are in full tank mode. They're going for Shadir Sanders. I don't like picking my second +1 line already. You know, the whole point of points is to get points, but I just think that everything is pointing to a Jacksonville win here.
You know, I respect that a lot. I think the Raiders quarterback is going to be Desmond Ridder, if I'm not mistaken. Like Mac Jones versus Desmond Ridder. What a game. Are we going to watch that one?
I wish it was in London.
Should we throw that one up on the big TV?
I wish it was in London so I could wake up at 6 a.m. just to watch, you know? I want that one all by itself.
Yeah, we need that. That should be the Sunday night game, honestly. Tankathon is real right now.
Very real.
But you're right. I think the Jaguars are poised to win this game just purely based off their talent. The question is, can the Raiders feed Brock Bowers enough? And the answer is no. Like they could give the Brock Bowers the ball 37 times in this game, and that would be their way to success. The rest of it doesn't really matter. But if they do feed Brock Bowers, they might win. If they don't, and they just kind of decide to throw in the towel, this is a game the Jaguars should handily win.
Agreed. One note on that, just because I also love Brock Bowers. The dude's an absolute stud. It's kind of tough being a number 1 tight end on a team with very little quarterback and receiving help, because it's like, it's easy to feed Justin Jefferson. Throw the ball deep downfield. But with a tight end, it's much more like, if you get a good tight end in a good system, he's like unstoppable. But when the whole defense can just be like, okay, we're not going to let you throw to the middle of the field on seam routes. That's why he's a guy that he'll either have 130 yards and 2 touchdowns, or he'll have like 15 yards on 6 catches, because if you just game plan for him, he's gone. So, yeah. Do me a favor, 100%. Jacksonville. Put together a game plan.
It's tough to ask Doug Peterson that, but we'll see if that actually comes together.
Fair enough.
All right. This is my second pick, right?
Correct.
I'm going to reserve the right with this pick. It is very, very conditional, but I believe that George Pickens is playing according to one of my fantasy teams. He still has points. He's not doubtful for this week. So I'm going to take the Steelers +6 against the Ravens. This one, the Steelers obviously won the first matchup and proved that they know how to handle the Ravens. Again, it's an in-division matchup in the AFC North. These are all just like rock fights. Any of these games are going to be tooth and nail scratching at each other. And so I think the Steelers have a good chance, especially if Pickens plays. They've proven that he is actually a very valuable piece to that roster. And I think without him, it looks a little rough because they just don't have any other receiving weapons and they kind of have to just run the ball. But if he's there, especially against this Ravens defense, I could see the Steelers winning this game again, another 18-12 type game.
Well, that's great. I love that.
It's also
pick.
6 points.
Yeah. Okay, so I have 5 quick points on that. 1, 6 points is way too many. All the Steelers do is play close games. Make it less than 3, or it doesn't make sense. Great pick. 2, they literally won this matchup before. Why are they +6? 3, George Pickens is, he is very talented. He's also, they should create their own category of wide receivers. It's like wide receiver 1-C, where it's guys like him and DK Metcalf, where they will have games where you're like, this is a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. And then they'll have other weeks where they're like, does this guy professionally play football? And that's all they do, is they either look like one of the best or they look like trash just a note. 4, I'm not going to remember my 5th point, but 4, I love the idea of like, oh, a guy's questionable, he's doubtful, like we don't really know where he is. We go to ESPN Fantasy Football and we look for points next to their name. Like they have more information than us. Like, oh, he's got the Q, but he's still got points. He has the Q, but he doesn't have points. You know, they know something I don't. He's going to play or he's not. Anyway, I just love that. Great pick. I'm going to let you have it all to yourself, though, because
wow, you didn't want the Steelers +6. I'm shocked, actually.
Honestly, it was one I was looking closely at, but I want to pick a funner one, which is my Carolina Panthers +4.5 against the Arizona Cardinals. Couple things here. One, last week was the first time the Panthers had been favored to win a game since 2022, I think.
Really?
It had been an insane stretch of games where they were underdogs. And so obviously everyone was so excited, and then they got stomped by the Cowboys because they'd been playing a little above their skis, and then everyone wanted to bet on them, and it all came back. Now everybody's out on them again. Everybody and their mother's going to be betting on Cardinals after last week's performance. This Panthers team has been getting better and better every week. Last week was a hiccup. It was a big misstep for sure, but their trajectory is going the right direction. Cardinals are probably going the other way. 4.5 points is a lot of points. Give me the Panthers.
Cardinals at the end of the season might get rid of Kyler Murray. That's just like where the Cardinals are at as a franchise. Like they might need to rebuild their whole thing and just, you know, MHJ on the sides and get a new quarterback, all that stuff.
The problem is it's not a great quarterback draft, but yeah. Yes. If this was last year's draft, they should have been tanking a month ago, but maybe wait one more year, see if you can go get Arch or somebody like that. I should also say, I don't know the uniform matchups, but if the Panthers go with their black and sky blues and Arizona goes with their white and reds, it's my favorite uniform matchup in the NFL.
As a side note, I think the black uniforms in general, like all the teams that have black uniforms, they look sick every time. Like there's not a single one that looks bad. The colors, they're like accent colors of every single team, whether it's red or freaking action green, whatever it is, they all look super cool. It doesn't matter what it is.
It does look very cool. I'm with you on that.
So I like that line. I think all the reasons that you listed, I think are good reasons to bet on the Panthers. Also, 4.5. 4.5 is a lot of points. You can still lose by 4. You've got some range there.
Yeah, not only the field goal, but the touchdown field goal difference can also get you the win there. I like that.
Yeah. All right, with my third and final pick of Week 16's NFL, Sound Up Seattle Value Dogs. I'm torn right now. I got 2 picks that are very tight, and they kind of swung in opposite directions between when I started this and when I wrote down my notes and between when we recorded this. So I'm going with the one that I was more skeptical about at the start, but I'm happy with it now. The Texans +3.5 against the Chiefs. You get the full field goal here. The other line that I had was the Seahawks and Vikings, and that moved from 3.5 to 3. I want that extra half point. The Texans, they haven't looked great all season. CJ Stroud has been kind of subpar in his sophomore season. And I think they lost Will Anderson early on too. Like they've been just a little battered and bruised. But Nico Collins has looked really good the last little bit. The Chiefs, obviously Mahomes got a little beat up this last weekend. And so in this, I'm, crossing my fingers for the Value Dogs, not for the Chiefs fans or anything else, but I'm crossing my fingers that Mahomes does not play this week. They've already solidified, they're going to win the AFC West and everything like that. So I think this is Texans +3.5 is a fun line, and I'm taking it.
Yeah, Chiefs scare me, but they do have a nasty tendency of winning close games, don't they? And 3.5 is going to cover in most of those likely scenarios. AFC matchup. Texans have underperformed, but we know what CJ can be. We know what Joe Mixon can be. Can they do it here? Worth noting that the Chiefs do still have something to play for. That number 1 overall seed in the AFC is still up for grabs between them and the Bills. But this is a big game for the Texans too. They need to lock up the AFC South. Colts are kind of nipping at their heels. Would have helped if they could secure last week, but we won't talk about that. Yeah, not my favorite line in the world, but I appreciate it. 3.5 points. Say what you will. 3.5 points is 3.5 points.
I didn't love a lot of the other lines, and that, to be fair, like that's just kind of where I ended up. Like the Jets +3.5. I feel like the Jets are going to swing the other way. Like all these lines are just like Cowboys +4. Like, do we really think the Cowboys are going to be within a field goal? No.
It's been one of those, and the stats back it up. It's been a favorites year. If we were doing overdogs, which doesn't make a lot of sense. If we're doing overdogs, there are a lot more lines here that I like for whatever reason. Help us out, Vegas. People are betting these favorites and they're winning money. Come our way. Help us out a little bit.
It's
why
like
can't
the
we
Saints
get Commanders to +5.5 against the Eagles? Why is it 3.5?
Yeah. The Saints +14 is not an appetizing line for us. It's the Saints are so bad. Move it up to 17.5.
They just lost Alvin Kamara. What's Taysom Hill going to do? Take every snap?
Yeah, it's just been a tough one for the underdogs, but we still do this. We do this every year. We'll keep it going.
We persevere.
Yeah.
There are those that do and those that don't. We do.
All right, that's going to do it for our Week 16 Sound Up Seattle Value Dogs. Next up, we've got probably what is going to be our favorite portion of the day because we don't have to talk about something bad or something disappointing. So it's time to talk Mariners. John, how do you want to open this segment? How do we want to start discussing the Mariners? Obviously, there's been a lot of rumors swirling about them and trades and what the front office wants to do. How do you want to start? What do you want to talk about first?
Okay, so this is what I want to do. I want to start talking about the pieces that left, just as kind of a refresher. There's some new names and stuff, but we mainly want to just, clear the decks for, okay, who's out from last year's team in, major roles. And then we should probably talk about the pieces on the board that we are, hearing about potentially moving. And then I think our longest conversation is, who is this team going to go and get,
Yeah.
So starting with who we lost, the three names that I have in terms of hitters are Jorge Polanco, Sam Haggerty, Josh Rojas. Bless their hearts, they're no longer with us. Now, two of those three do not make me sad at all. Jorge Polanco was immensely disappointing. He hit .213 all of last year. 16 home runs was actually pretty impressive on his part, but he just didn't give us the at-bat to at-bat performance that we were expecting from a former All-Star. So, not quite good riddance, but also not quite fare thee well, somewhere in between there. Sam Haggerty barely got on the field, only 15 at-bats, and he was .067 average in those 15, if they're even worth looking at.
Yeah, I think he tore his Achilles too, like midway through his stint in AAA as well. So just not a great season for Sam.
Sorry, Sam. We love you, but we'll see you later. And then Josh Rojas, beloved on this podcast, beloved by me specifically, started his season on an absolute tear. We thought he was the prince who was promised. We were ready to believe, but he ended up having his worst statistical season of his young career. He batted .269 in 2022 with 9 home runs, .245 in 2023 with 4 home runs, and then .225 in 2024 with 8 home runs. So, the power crept up a little bit, but his on base plummeted about halfway through the year and it never came back. So it's sad to see him go. I love him, but at the same time, his performance was not consistent.
Yeah, Rojas as a guy, he had a 91 OPS plus last year, which for those of you, again, newer to the Mariners discussion in the baseball stats, anything with a plus in it is relative to 100. So if you're below 100 with a plus statistic, that means you are below average. And Josh Rojas started the season with like an OPS plus of 140. Like he was hitting 345 at one point early on. So really, really fell off late in the season. It was tough. And we were really big fans of him on this pod. And just really couldn't pull through kind of in the last stint. Obviously a great defensive third baseman, but for whatever reason, he just couldn't develop any power. So tough to see him go. And we, like I said, we liked him, but I think it's time to move on, get a little bit better of a third baseman.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's certainly time. And we'll be excited to talk about third baseman here shortly.
Yes. With that, I will also mention one other guy, Austin Voth, the reliever, who, he was just kind of a big addition. Once we traded Ryan Stanek, he kind of took over that kind of third spot in the relief pitching, especially with the absence of Santos and Brash last season. It was like Austin Voth had to really step up. So he did a great job for the Mariners. Tough to see him go, but I'm sure he'll get a nice contract this next year, and he'll have made a lot of money from his performance last season. He was a very good reliever for us.
He's probably the most valuable guy that we lost in terms of game-to-game performance. He was a very known quantity, and it's a bummer to see him go, but does free up, a roster spot, frees up cap space, gives this team a little bit of flexibility.
Especially the way that we know this team works in the kind of bullpen reliever area, it's really easy for them to replace a guy like Austin Voth with internal guys. So and monetarily, it's not like it was any loss.
We have so much money and value tied up in those top 3 reliever names. Obviously, that didn't work out really in any way this last season with injuries. But you can't plan on those guys being non-factors. You have to plan on them being there and being effective with the way that we're paying them. So with that regard, he was very valuable last year. But if things go the way we hope, he wouldn't be as valuable next year.
To elaborate on that, you want to have contingencies. You don't want to hope and then not have a backup, but you do want to have players that can perform in those roles if you deal with those injuries. You don't want to just say, oh, Gregory Santos, who was injured 3 different times last year, is going to have a full healthy season. You can't assume that this starting rotation is going to be healthy like they have been the last 2 years. It's just like, these are things that you have to build in, but you don't want to allocate a ton of funds for because you have to make sure that you're spending your money right.
Correct. And especially on a team like the Mariners, who are not known for their big pockets.
Yes.
Instead of worrying about contingencies, I would rather worry about the guys that actually play every single day. Our third baseman, our first baseman, these guys that are, we're seeing over and over and over again. How good are they? What are they compared to average? Especially with our starting pitching where it is and our salary cap where it is. Let's not focus too much on contingencies. We got too many immediate problems.
Yes.
Don't worry about an extra life raft when, the current one is need patching.
The current boat is actually sinking as we speak. Yeah. So as we talk a little bit about pitching, let's jump into what is probably the biggest discussion for the Mariners this offseason, because they're not hugely in discussions with a ton of free agents, or at least super high value free agents like the Alex Bregmans of the world. We are expecting them to probably expecting is a strong word. We have heard a lot of things about them probably trading a starting pitcher, whether that be Brian Wu, Bryce Miller. I don't think they're going to trade George Kirby or Logan Gilbert, or the most commonly named one, Luis Castillo. John, just looking at those guys, thinking about that, who would you be most in favor of getting rid of? And when I say that, I don't mean I don't mean you would like it, because people will get mad. But it is something that will potentially happen. We have to talk through it. So talk me through your thoughts about one of those guys getting traded.
So for me, it's a question of value. Having loved all these guys, I guess there's one guy I would pull out of that bunch. I'm not interested in moving Bryce Miller. When it comes to a conversation of value, he strikes me as a guy that has a lot of value now, but will have a lot more value in a year. It just seems like he is, in my mind, a lock as a really talented starting pitcher. And he hasn't, I don't think, fully reached that perception in greater baseball. It just seems like the wrong time to move him in my mind. So for me, this conversation is about Brian Wu and Luis Castillo. Now, the thing about those two is Brian Wu is young, and I think I forget sometimes how young he is. He's 24 years old. He was a member of the 2021 draft class. He was just impactful immediately, so we've really been paying attention to him from the very beginning. But he is very, very young, very, very talented. I'm sure we'll get into some of his stats. But so you have the young, really talented guy versus Castillo, 32 years old, much more of an old vet, but he is cheap. His contract is incredible right now. For a little context, Max Fried just signed an 8-year, $218 million contract with the New York Yankees. Castillo is owed less than a third of that amount per year over the next 3 years. So, he's not quite at Fried's level as a player, but, he's not miles off, and he's getting paid a third as much. So his contract is incredibly team-friendly. I think for the right price, I'd be willing to move on from either one of those guys. For me, it's a question of where do other teams see the value?
I 100% agree with you. I think when it comes to Brian Wu, it's do the Mariners think that his arm is too fragile for what they could be getting to trade him? If they think, okay, this guy is not going to be able to make 25 starts a year. I think he made 16, 20 last year. If he's not going to be able to make 25 starts a year, and you can trade him for a guy who is super controllable and who you portray as being able to make those starts, that's your third baseman right there. You could trade him immediately for, just to throw out a name who we will probably talk about at some point, you could trade him immediately for Alec Boehm from the Phillies, and probably someone else if they value him like I just mentioned, because that's just so valuable to have so many years of control over a guy like Brian Wu, that kind of starting pitcher. Will the Mariners trade him? I don't believe so. I haven't heard any rumblings really about Brian Wu. As a guy, he is that fourth young starter that the Mariners could move on from in the terms of their areas of strength. But I still think that Brian Wu is a guy that the Mariners want to keep on this roster. I still think in terms of odds, Luis Castillo is a guy the Mariners want to keep on this roster and has a 30% chance of getting traded at this point. Like all the talk, it's still not likely that Luis Castillo gets traded unless you can find a real suitor. Let's talk Luis Castillo. Like you said, super team-friendly contract. I think he's making just over $20 million a year for the next 3 years. And then, it's tough for Luis Castillo because he, as a guy, throws from a low arm angle. His body will not necessarily be able to produce as much power. He's a little bit smaller of a guy compared to a Logan Gilbert type pitcher. And so in 3 years, if he's unable to get an extension, that team, he's basically going to have to go into free agency and not have made and had the opportunity to sign a big contract like the Max Fried's, which was a great team-friendly deal for the Mariners. It just sucks for Luis Castillo in that situation.
Relatively. $68.25 million over the next 3 years is pretty good.
It is pretty nice. I think you could live substantially off that. But yeah, at the end of the day, Luis Castillo is probably the most likely move, and you could trade him to a contender. Like a team like the Orioles, who just lost Corbin Burns, could really use a Luis Castillo in that rotation. They did just sign somebody, so that was just a team that popped into the top of my head. I'm not saying the Orioles are a major trade piece. There's also been talks with the Red Sox, I think, about getting Tristan Casas, who's a first baseman from the Red Sox, who I really didn't like name-wise, and then I looked into some of his stats, and I kind of got it. But yeah, a guy like that who's younger, more controllable, who has a cheaper contract, so you could work around with that. There's kind of ways to go about moving Castillo that would be beneficial. So if I were to pick, it would definitely be him.
Yeah, for me, that's where the value thing comes in. And it's an interesting comparison because Luis is older, but he's also more known. Wu has had injuries issues, which you implied, which kind of limits what his potential could be. Maybe we've seen the last of it, and he really, steps his way up into a, just outside the Cy Young discussion type of pitcher for the next, 6 or 7 years. Or maybe his career kind of derails. It's hard to say. But objectively, Brian Wu's not only 8 years younger, but he had a better season than Castillo. Castillo had pitched 30 games to Wu's 22, but in those 30 games, he had a 3.64 ERA and a 1.17 WHIP. Wu in his 22 starts was a 2.89 ERA with a 0.9 WHIP.
Wu was electric. Wu was so good when he was healthy.
Yeah, Castillo, obviously known for his fastball, 93rd percentile on Savant in his fastball run value. Brian Wu is 95th percentile in his fastball run value, 93rd in pitching run overall to Castillo's 86. And then the big difference to me is Castillo, pretty good at preventing walks, 73rd percentile in walk rate. You know what Brian Wu is off the top of your head?
Probably above 9. I don't have anything pulled up on Savant, so you just tell me.
100. He has
really
the best walk rate in professional baseball. He is in 100th percentile in walk rate. So Wu, when he's on the mound, is objectively better. The question is, he's a 5-pitch guy to Luis's 4. They both throw the 4-seam slider, sinker, and changeup. But Wu throws the sweeper at 10%, so he's a true 5-pitch guy. Yeah, I really like Wu. I like him a lot. But the question for me is, can he stay healthy? For the right trade, I would move on from Wu. And yeah, I would rather lose Castillo, especially if they're valued the same way. But if this team's talking about making a big swing, I do think Wu probably has more value to an opposing team.
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk potentially who they might add based on that or based on those trades. And let's get a little bit into what kind of the reverberations of if they make that trade, what happens with their offseason plan. Because really the area of strength that is, and gosh, it's really weird because I've heard so much on trading Luis Castillo for Tristan Casas from the Red Sox, trading for a first baseman. And to me, that really doesn't make sense. And the real problem is there's just so many first basemen that are available. Like you can get Christian Walker for maybe 3 years, $60 million. That might be even a high valuation, but 3 years, $60 million. Like Christian Walker was a top 10 first baseman from on the Diamondbacks the last couple of years. Like he's been very good. Obviously Justin Turner's in the free agency market, and then Carlos Santana, like all guys that the Mariners have been known to be linked to, as well as you have Luke Raley, who is basically your fourth outfielder and backup first baseman, lefty platoon first baseman if you want to do that. Like the first base option is plentiful right now. And so if you were to trade Luis Castillo or Brian Wu for a first baseman, I would want it to be a major piece and or somebody that you could, that has a little bit more flexibility and could move to third or something like that. So what are your thoughts? Do you kind of feel the same way about that one?
I do. I've heard about the Casas rumor as well. And I think the thing is, obviously, he's tied in. It would be him, and the ones that I've seen are him and a couple of like top 27 prospects, which, it's always good to reinvigorate the farm system, but I might want more immediate value. Casas is a guy, he had a good 2023 season. He's young, he's only 24. And in 2023, he batted .263 and hit 24 home runs. Took a step back last year, 241, 13 home runs in about half the at-bats. I think he must have gotten hurt. I don't follow the Red Sox, but I'm assuming it was injury that cost him and that he just wasn't able to get up and running in the same way as he did the previous year. But, these are real names. This is, Castillo's a guy that competed for Cy Young a couple years ago. I don't think Casas and a couple of prospects are on the level of his value.
You think about the value that kind of trade would give the Mariners, and it would be a lot of it would be monetary value. You're offloading $22 million of salary for what would be closer to, I think, 8.
Sure.
So that frees up $14 million. For a team that's as strapped for cash as I'm gonna say that in quotes, strapped for cash, because they're really not. The owners could spend more, but with what they can work with, $14 million would be a lot for this team. The main thing is like, what do you do? Who do you go sign if you make that trade at third base? Or are you just going to say, okay, Ryan Bliss, Cole Young will play second base and Dylan Moore's third base? Because we saw last year, Dylan Moore is so flawed when he plays every day. He won the utility player gold glove, and we talked so much trash about him towards the end of the season because it's just what Dylan Moore does. He gets overexposed.
Yeah, he has a role. I just want to shout out a name I think is far less realistic, but a name that's out there as a trade chip right now. And it does not necessarily fit into the team at all. I like to do this. I like to take big swings at players that don't make a lot of sense. But it's nice to say their names on a podcast. I'm looking at Brent Rooker on Oakland. Guy plays left field. It's why you love the outfield, man. You can shuffle him around. It doesn't matter. He was unbelievable last year. 293 average, 562 slugging, hit 39 home runs. His last 2 seasons, he's hit 69 home runs combined. He's a guy that's kind of come on late in his career. He's already 30 years old. So that would, cut into his value a little bit. But I'm not even going to read you any of his savant numbers. Let me just tell you that there's a lot of red when you're looking at his batting. He strikes me as the kind of guy, he's 30 years old. He's on the Oakland Raiders, I guess Las Vegas Athletics. I shouldn't even say Oakland anymore.
Sacramento, I think, next year.
Okay, Sacramento Athletics. He's a guy that's closer to a 1-for-1 to me for either of these guys, as opposed to a Tristan Cass, an Addison Barger is another name at third base. Some of these guys where it's like, okay, you get him, and then how many prospects come along with? Brent Rooker's the type of guy where it's like, okay, we went Castillo for Rooker straight up. I wouldn't be weeping tears.
Yeah, I don't want to turn into the A's where it's like we trade, they traded Matt Chapman, they traded Matt Olson. Like they traded a bunch of great guys back in whatever it was. I think they had a really good team in 2018, 2019 era. And they traded a bunch of really good guys for just like a bulk package, and that didn't really give them anything. Like you need to get a good solid return in these trades if you're going to get rid of a guy like Luis Castillo or Brian Wu.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I like Brent Rooker a lot. It's tough to imagine that we as the Mariners would want to trade Brian Wu to a team that we're going to play 19 times a year or whatever it is.
But Castillo makes more sense in that sense. You know, he's
Castillo does,
guy.
especially if he's going to, if he's going to be making $22 million a year, he's going to be there. Like he would be their number one pitcher. He'd be their guy that they put everywhere, which would be cool for Castillo. But yeah, I think I really like Brent Rooker. I don't know how well he fits. Like that trade fits what the Oakland A's want. Like they, as the A's, want more bulk packages.
Sure.
So they would probably want more prospects for a guy like Brent Rooker. But I like where your head's at, and especially Rooker is more of a DH. He doesn't really play defense very well, so it would be nice to just slot him into that DH spot and play him every day from there.
That's a good note. Yeah, and the Castillo thing, yeah, if they wanted Castillo, it would certainly be more as like a rental to then turn him around later, but then why trade for him in the first place is the question.
Yep. Next up, let's talk a little bit of third base. We're getting to the 1 hour mark, and we'll have to stop because we got to record another one. But do you see? I mentioned Alec Boehm earlier in the pod, and he's a top 10 third baseman in the league. Third base is kind of a spot where it's like it's a little underwhelming. Like there's kind of 15 third basemen in the league that are good, and then maybe 5 that are great, but none of those 5 are ever going to leave their teams right now. Or are not in a position. And then you have guys like Alex Bregman, who, as much as people like Alex Bregman as a player, I don't think he would play well in T-Mobile. He plays so well with the short porch in left field for the Astros. And the Mariners, Mariners Stadium is not that kind of bandbox. So I don't think Bregman plays well in terms of a free agent signing.
Plus, I don't want Bregman.
Yeah.
I don't want any Astros on this team.
That's fair. Who do you see? I mean, there's got here. I'll pull out 2 names. I'll pull out the 2 names that I think are the big pieces that could be a little bit more known guys that the Mariners could go for. Nolan Arenado, St. Louis Cardinals, 33-year-old guy who didn't necessarily play super well last year, but a 101 OPS plus with 23 doubles and 16 home runs, ended at 272 with a 325 on base and a 394 slugging. Still a Gold Glove finalist. He's still good defensively. But he is definitely slipping. And then you've got a guy like Alec Boehm from the Phillies who had a 117 OPS plus, hit 280 with a 332 on base, 448 slugging, 15 home runs, 5 stolen bases, a really good first half, and then kind of fell off in the second half of the season. Of those 2, who kind of sticks out to you more? And if there's another name that you're thinking of, let me know.
Yeah, Arenado would be awesome, obviously. He just declined a Astros trade today, which brought me a lot of joy. He closed the door on that one using his no-trade clause. Obviously, his no-trade clause means that would be a harder one to achieve. But there's little doubt in my mind that he would be the better fit on this team. I think him and Julio would do really well together. And then, obviously, completely spacing right now, our Rays acquisition, whom I love dearly.
Randy Rosarena.
Randy Rosarena would be awesome. But yeah, I think those are 2 great names. Obviously I just threw out a big name, but I always, when we're trying to get down into the nitty gritty, I try to avoid, some of those biggest names, some ones that stand out to me, that are also, just in some different situations. Ryan McMahon on Colorado.
Have you ever heard the name McMahon?
That's not how you pronounce that.
That's how you pronounce that. You've never had a friend with the last name McMahon?
It's not. It's spelled Mahon. That's McMahon?
Yeah.
Ryan McMahon. That makes more sense, honestly. Has been very consistent in his career. He's 30 years old. In his 3 seasons in the MLB, he's averaged 246, 240, 242, and he's hit 20, 23, and 20 home runs over the last 3 years. So that's a guy that is a known quantity. Used to playing in the cold. Obviously not necessarily used to the heavy air down here, but not like a guy coming up from Arizona that's going to be shocked by the cold weather. I just think he strikes me as a name that's maybe a little more realistic. Colorado's in a place where, they should be open to all sorts of trades. And then maybe a lower end. If that's a medium-sized trade, a lower end would be like an Addison Barger out of Toronto. 25 years old, really young, only hit 200 last year with 7 home runs in 208 plate appearances, so didn't get a ton of run, but 99th percentile in arm strength. He's a hell of a fielder. And it'd be interesting to see if he can grow into a bigger role on this team.
Yeah.
Obviously, though, Arenado would be the best.
I think in terms of guys that are available and on the trade blocks, it's Arenado, it's Bohm. Honestly, if McMahon was available, I would be happy to trade for McMahon. We'd probably be trading prospects for a lot of these guys because, especially like a team like the Cardinals is trying to rebuild. A team like the Phillies wants to compete now, so we could probably. There's a world where we could get a Castillo trade done for Alec Bohm. We would probably have to give them some money or figure something out to make that work because Alec Bohm is 2 years for a pretty controllable guy. We might actually be able to swing that as just a 1-for-1. But either way, like those three are really good names. And then I like the step down kind of discussion of okay, maybe we could talk, Luis Rengifo from the Los Angeles Angels, like guys like that. Are also options, especially for this team, because they just need a string. They need to put somebody in that 7 hole. Like I would be happy with Luis Rengifo hitting 7th for the Mariners right now. So there's some options there at the third base spot, but it would be through trade. And I think that's the big thing that people are missing. It's like we don't want to trade a pitcher for one of the positions that is so available in free agency, like a first baseman.
Yeah.
It sounds like the Mariners want to stick with, the Bliss, Dylan Moore, potentially Cole Young platoon type situation at second base for this season and kind of just have that be their 9 spot. So in terms of the acquisitions that need to be made, it's first base, it's third base. Those are the options. Those are who we've heard about. Anything else to say before we can kind of put the lock on this Mariners discussion and throw it out there?
No, I think you did a great job summarizing there. Yeah, those are the 2 positions of need, and we're in a good position to address both. We've got a glut at pitching. We've talked about this before. This is a good time, especially after last year, to prioritize hitting, prioritize improving this offense. Moving on from a guy like Luis would be great. That's a great point about moving him to the Phillies. Maybe the only situation where we can move him for value to a team that would want him.
Yeah.
And then, try to address first base and free agency, and that'll be exciting. I'm sure we'll have more to say on that as time goes by, but this was more of a third base and pitching discussion, and it would be obviously very sad to lose Luis or Brian or whoever, but I'm not sure how you feel, but I really think it's time.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling spicy about this Mariners offseason. This next little bit's going to be good. For those of you that are watching us on YouTube, we do this kind of talk all the time. Basically every week we'll talk something new in Seattle sports, something that's going on. And if there is a Mariners trade that goes through, unless it's like Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, we will be making an emergency pod, whether that's just me hopping on to talk through it or us both talking at some point about the trade or about the signing, whatever it is. We will have a discussion on that. So feel free to follow, subscribe, do all that stuff. Anything else to say before I sign us off?
Get us out of here.
All right. Yeah, we've got to record another one right now. So for John Carey, I'm Tyler Cartwright. This has been the Sound Up Seattle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode of Sound Up Seattle, please feel free to give us a follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening. You can subscribe to our YouTube at Sound Up Seattle. You can email us your questions, comments, concerns at soundupseattle@gmail.com. You can find us on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram at Sound Up Seattle. You can find me, Tyler, at TyCart50 everywhere that's important. And you can find John
playing Skyrim again because I'm a maniac.
He's back on the Skyrim grind. For those of you that have been following along the entire time, he does this twice a year now.
Twice a year. I never get very far. I always just start, play through like level 25 and then quit, and then I'll just start a new game. I never pick up where I left off.
Well, level 25 is what, 50 hours of gameplay or something like that?
It doesn't take me very long.
All right. Well, and I guess with all that being said, let's go Seahawks. That's kind of the only real team that's playing we talked about.
Yeah, that's very right. Go Mariners. Make a good trade. Go M's.